It was an early morning at Canterlot High School. Bright Idea was standing by his locker with his two friends, Curly Wins and Whiskey. They were just talking about the day's classes where they were looking forward and that they were even looking forward to the weekend, since they were looking forward to just relax and maybe spend time together. As he was talking, Bright Idea noticed a girl passing by with some of her friends was in fact Velvet Sky. Velvet Sky was a girl that Bright Idea had a crush on. He was too shy to announce to admit that to her or anyone else. The only ones who know about it was in fact Curly Wins and Whiskey. Since they were also since Curly Wins was dating Whiskey, they were only ones that was aware about his love for Velvet Sky. Even though he did admit to them, they were actually really surprised that he was in love with someone, but they had asked him if he had told her. But he said no, he was too shy. But they said maybe one day that he would be able to tell her. And the only hint he had said was that he really hoped that is it possible that he might bring the courage to tell her. As the day was went going on, Bright Idea actually shared at least two or three other classes along with Valencia. Even though when he was sitting in back behind her in the class, he was looking at her and from time to time and just trying to just glaring at her for a few seconds before go back to his own the subject he was working on. But it was something else though, because even within a few weeks, the school prom it was going to be approach, and most of the students actually had already found a date for the prom. But Bright Idea, he wanted to go to the prom with Velvet Sky, but he had no idea if she wanted even to go with him or if she perhaps would even was even considered to be with someone like him. So even after school was over and when he went home, he was still very bothered that he never had took the courage to tell her how he actually felt. So during the time when this rest of the day, he was talking to Curly Wins and Wizkid on FaceTime in a group chat. They tried to really convince him to maybe time to take the time and enough courage to ask Velvet Sky to be his prom date to the prom. Even though they actually had a point, but even deep down in his heart, he was too afraid to even not acknowledge that in the first place. He wanted to be able to tell Velvet Sky how he really feels for her, but every time when he was about to walk up to her and tell her, he always get too scared. So instead of asking her out that or telling her, he asked her something else, maybe some random question about maybe how her day had been so far in this weekend, something like that, but never actually managed to bring the right words of the topic he wants to talk about. Of all the things he wants to talk about is how to ask her out to the prom. But every single time when he was found to want to do it, he otherwise other just shaking his he just either just walks away or ignores the question or asks her something else that is not even related to the topic he wants to ask her. But as the prom was getting closer and closer, he had no idea what to do. As the weekend came, he was originally going to plan to spend time with Curlewins and Wizkid, but then decided to be alone this whole weekend. He decided to be at home instead, just to watch some TV or movies. He really wanted to be with someone like Valve Sky since In his mind, she is the most beautiful girl in the entire school. But even despite that, he really liked her more than anything. But he was very insecure, not confident enough to even to ask her or even telling her how he really felt. But he really wanted to be with someone like her since she's a very beautiful and confident, but he had no idea how to react. As time passed, and as sure enough, there was only a couple of days away from the prom was going to happen. And still, everyone at the school had a date for the prom, except for Bright Idea. And he was even completely sure that even Velvet Sky had a date for this prom already. But it later turned out from WizKid that Velvet Sky hasn't even found a date for the prom. So she decided to go with some of her some of her friends as a friend date to the prom instead. So but then WizKid said, maybe you can ask her for a dance at the prom. And then maybe you can take the courage not to tell her, he said. But Bright Idea maybe thought that could work. But even he knows that he probably just back out from that this even from the idea. But later on though, with a couple of days later, prom and Bright. He went to the prom alone, but there was not much of a prom because he had done it before though. But as he was standing there at the prom by the table where they had some of the some drinks and some snacks they had, he was just standing there by himself watching others dancing or just socializing. But even though he did talk to some of his friends did, like Wizkid, Curly Wins, and even Flash Gentry of all, but he actually was alone. But suddenly, when the music was to start and the main dance was going to start, he saw everyone was dancing, but not him. Even then, when he's noticed in the corner, like behind him, Velvet Sky was standing there completely alone. He he thought maybe that she could have found at least maybe someone to date with, maybe one of her friends or maybe another boy from the school, but it wasn't no one. So he took a deep breath and slowly walked up to Velvet Sky and asked her how the prom is going for her so far. She said that she had actually a good time, and then he asked why she isn't she up there on the dance floor and dancing with someone. She said that she didn't have anyone to dance with. The most boys are already dancing with someone else, and since she didn't have any date, she didn't have to look on a dance floor. But then she asked him the same thing, and he actually laughed a little bit and said that he didn't have a date either. He was too shy to even ask someone out for the prom, so he had no idea what to do. Then he just asked her randomly if she wanted to go out and dance with him. She smiled and said yes, and in fact, she took his hand and they walked to the dance floor and started dancing. For the very first time, he managed to get the courage to ask her something which she said yes. So maybe there would be a chance for him to maybe take enough courage to ask her again. Or maybe it's something tell her. But after the dance was over, he went back to some of the freshmen, like something to drink, and a various guy went to some of her friends. At a table, he met into Curly Wins and Wizkid. In fact, they saw him dancing with Valley Sky, and they just nodded and said, "Well, I really thought you never took the courage to ever ask her," said Curly Wins. "Well, I did ask her to dance. That's all I did." "So you haven't even told her yet?" said Wizkid. No, I haven't. At least at the moment. You maybe should probably do that. After all, she's looking at you. Like, what? And he's turned around, and sure enough, Velvet Sky was actually looking at him while she was talking to her friends and smiled. That made him blush. And she blushed as well and continued to talk to her friends. But for the rest of the night, he didn't talk to her even more or even dance anymore. But he didn't mind. At least he had one dance with the one he had a strong feelings for. That's what mattered to him. But even after all of this, how much of his confidence had been strong. But there was just one thing. Even the same weekend after the prom was over, one afternoon, on a Friday afternoon, just after he came home from school, his phone rang, and he picked up. He was expecting maybe Curly Wins or maybe Wizkid to be calling him, but it wasn't either of them, and later turned out to be none other than Velvet Sky. Velvet Sky actually had asked Curly Wins for Bright Idea's phone number, and he actually gladly to give it to her. She actually called them to thank him for the dance for the prom, and she wanted to ask him something. So he said that she could ask him anything. Then suddenly, "Do you have a crush on me?" she asked with a smile. Even though he could see, but it was like she was smiling. Hearing those words made his heart beating a lot faster. He was stuttering how not. He had no idea what to say. He could either have an option just hang up, which would be a lot of rude for her. He could lie to her, which also she would later find out it was a lie, or telling the truth, or maybe found an excuse that he had to have something to do, and maybe he would call her back later. But the only option he did take was, in fact, telling the truth. Uh, yeah, um, yes, it is true. I have a crush on you, about this guy. And was silent in the phone. But then he asked, "How did you even find out? Did anyone tell you?" "No. The only I know for sure was your reaction after prom." And then he realized, as she was looking at him at the prom, he blushed and smiled. She took that as a sign that in fact he had feelings for her. But then he said, "I know maybe you don't have the same feelings for me, but I do really understand you really are really you are really a beautiful girl, but I understand if you don't have any feelings for back from me though." Which I but then suddenly he was cut off. "But I do like you. Just more even more as a friend." He was just stunned. She told him she likes him more as a friend. So it later turned out she had been in love with him for the past few weeks, and she was in fact hoping that he would ask her out to the prom. But when he never did, she was surprised. But later she found out why he didn't do that, because he was afraid or just too shy to even ask her. But now she was aware why. And then she even asked him if he wanted maybe to go out. And he said yes. They decided to go out the next day on Saturday to go to the movies. They actually had such great time at the movies. They saw a comedy movie, and even afterwards, they even went to a small diner nearby to have something to eat. There, they talked about the movie, what they thought about it, what some bad of it, what some good parts, of the, some of the characters. But this was in fact the starting of a new relationship for Bright Ideas. Bright Ideas has never been such happy and strong confidence now that he was aware that Velvet Sky was in love with him and that now they were dating. Even the same week afterwards, the whole school was aware of them being together. Even Velvet Sky had told her friends during the weekend. They were happy for her. Even Curlet Wins and WizKid were just smiling and giving him a pat on the back and said, well, we didn't expect you to be such brave enough to even tell her. They were actually not even aware that, in fact, it was actually Velvet Sky who made the first step by telling him on the phone. They first believed maybe that she would just want to call him for maybe ask for help, or maybe it's like homework, something like that. But never to be actually never call him for anything like that. But they were actually just happy though. Their relationship between each other just remained strong, solid, strong. But then one day, when they had been together for about a year, they wanted to celebrate it a little bit different. First, they went to a restaurant nearby in town, and which they had rented a table. And after that, they decided to take a walk in the park just to relax, just to enjoy the company. But when they arrived past the large, to the big, when they passed the big fountain in the park, a man stepped from behind, in front of them, and pointing a gun, demanded they hand over various guys' purse, Bright Ideas' wallet, and their phones, any other values they had. Even though Valve Sky was willing to comply with this and was about to hand over her purse, but Bright Ideas put out his arm in front of her and said, "Don't." But the man was apparently not even listening. Bright Idea tried to talk to this guy, tried to calmly talk to him to leave, and just go away and just try to give up on this, try not to rob them. Even Vampire Sketch was actually terrified. Still, this strange guy was pointing his weapon against them, back and forward, and he then pointed at the Vampire guy and said, "If you don't comply, I will shoot your little girlfriend here." But Vampire Guy was now terrifying, and Bright Idea stand in front of her and said, "You don't dare do that. Then hand over the values you have," said the guy, and still pointed the gun at them. But Velvet Sky was now so terrified she actually threw her wallet, her purse, in the feet of the guy. And even though when he tried to pull it up, even though Brian Idea knows he had maybe only one chance, or maybe as the guy was pulling up, he maybe believed the guy would be distracted enough to he could maybe try to attack this guy, or maybe knock the weapon out of his hand with something, or maybe grab Velvet Guy's arm and just run away. But even he wanted to try. Velvet Guy was so terrified, she was petrified of fear. She wouldn't even move, not even if he tried to drag her. Her feet wouldn't even respond. That how terrified he was. But then when the guy pulled out the purse and said, he started grabbing up the money that she had left, and then threw the purse on the ground and said, demanded that Bright Idea hand over his wallet and his phone or anything of the value he has. But Bright Idea refused. The guy tried at least once and a second time, but more angry tone, and even pointed the gun at his chest twice, poking his chest and said, "Give me your wallet!" By a more almost loud screaming tone. But Bright Idea refused. He still didn't want to give anything to this guy. Apparently, as he was doing that, the guy was about to lose his temper, and he screamed at him, "Give me your wallet!" But then, Velvet Sky, as she was just standing behind Bright Ideas, saw that Bright Ideas still refused and even said, "Forget it," he said. And then the guy smacked him in the face and then fired his gun 3 times in Bright Idea's chest, which he fell to the ground, and the guy just ran off without taking anything from Bright Idea. For only a few seconds, Velvet Sky was terrified what just happened. She tried to process what happened. After that, she managed to grab Bright Idea's phone, called for 911, and shortly after, only a few minutes, the ambulance arrived and he was immediately taken to the hospital. The police remained behind to ask questions to Velvet Sky since Bright Ideas was unconscious and he was taken to surgery right away when he arrived at the hospital. She tried to give as much details about this guy as much as possible, even knowing they may not even find him. But luckily though, they managed to find this guy. In fact, he was actually standing around the corner of this happening. Even with his hood off, he had hide his gun and pretend that he was just out for a walk. But the police were just passing by and saw him. He still saw them, but he acted normally, as nothing had happened. When they walked up to him, asked if he had been at the park at this moment when the shooting happened, he denied. He hasn't even been there. They asked him when he was out, where he had been, or where he was going. He said he had just been out for a walk and he was going home. But then one of the police officers saw that at the gun in their pockets. They had all the rights then, they arrested the guy. And it turned out they managed to arrest the attacker. Velvet Sky was later taken to the hospital by her parents. She was terrified. She had no idea. Her boyfriend tried to protect her, and now she may have chance she may even lose her boyfriend. She was waiting in the waiting room with her parents almost the entire night. It felt that they weren't there for the entire night, but it was only for at least 5 to 6 hours. When the doctor came out the waiting room, she was expecting the bad news. But the doctor told Velvet Sky that Bright Idea he survived, but he's still in a very critical condition for the next 12 hours. He was immediately taken to ICU, where he stayed overnight. Even despite the doctor said there might be a chance that he may not even survive at all. But to a big amazement, Bright Idea survived, and he spent a couple of days in ICU. When he managed to survive, was then later transferred to his own room, and for the next couple of days afterwards, he still had to remain in hospital for observation before he was about to be released. Even after all such much time, Velvet Sky was still terrified she may have lost her boyfriend entirely. Even especially just only about the same night, but all this happened. Velvet Sky, when she came home, had called her friends on a FaceTime video chat. She told her friends what just happened because they saw she was completely devastated, crying. She was barely speaking a word they could understand. But when they managed to calm her down enough, she told them the entire story, and they were devastated themselves. They were so terrified. They were devastated themselves. Soon, they told their friends, who told their friends, and they continued from that. And soon, everyone at Kentwood High School was now aware about what happened. They actually did went to see Bright Idea at the hospital, giving some like get well cards and even some greetings and telling her how that he was a very strong minded person, that he was really strong, that he managed to pull through. Even Curly Wins and Wizkid visit him as often as they could at the hospital. They were really surprised, but most of all shocked, but relieved that he had made it. And after a couple of weeks, he was back to school, and even though he felt maybe that he wasn't finally entirely recovered, but he was. But it was lucky enough to have found this guy there for his side. It later turned out this guy who attacked them at the park got Finn was sent to prison for life without parole, which both of them are especially happy. Even Vanessa guy was happy, and she even told Bright Idea that she was so proud that he tried to protect her, even it meant he would not lose his own life. She even told him she had no idea how she were how her life would have been if she lost him. And he said the same thing. He couldn't even bear himself to stand there to see the guy shooting her. He would rather take the bullets rather from than being rather from her to be hurt. This relationship between Bright ID and Valley Sky remained such a strong time. Even afterwards, they were just happy. Even after they were graduated from school and a couple of years later, they actually moved in the same place just shortly after they finished school. Bright Idea actually started working at the local at the mall, but the same technical store where Twilight was working, which she was actually recommended him to her boss, and he was hired. Venice guy though, she actually started working as at the animal shelter for a part-time job, and she even worked at the same sushi bar where Sans Chiman was working. And she actually had recommended Venice guy to her boss, and when she was hired, they were actually having such great time together. Their lives was such bright for them. And after just been had been worked for about 3 years and lived together for 3 years, Bright Idea proposed to this guy, who said yes, and she was really happy though. And especially both families and friends were so beyond happy. Even after all of this time to be together, Bright Idea could have been happier. They even had a small honeymoon. They went to a small lake near outside town. They rented a small cabin for about a week, and there they had actually just a great time. But just barely 2 years later, Both Bright Idea and Velvet Sky did announce they were expecting their first baby within a few months, and they were expecting a daughter. When the daughter was about 4 years old, they were expecting a second baby, and this time it turned out to be another daughter. But when their second daughter was about 4, they expecting another baby, and they had a son. They were really happy to have two daughters and one son together. Even both of them sometimes talked about the moment that changed their lives entirely. Their meaning about the attack at the park. And even when Bright idea, they brought it up that if Valviscar had even told him, or even asked him on the phone, they never would have ended up being dating and even got married or have their family together. She actually agreed with that. If if Valviscar had even called him those years ago, she may have missed out so much joy with Bright Idea. And Bright Idea, he could have been more happier to be with the one he loved the most of all. And for that, he was very grateful that Velvet Sky did call him all those years ago after prom, which later made start for their relationship, even if it might have even ended. But he was really happy that he made it through and the lives was once back to normal, and now having been married, having a family together, was the perfect thing that he ever had asked for. And this is how Velvet Sky and Bright Idea for the true love got a big family together. The end.